Welcome everybody. This is EC201 Microeconomics. Today we are doing Chapter 12. I have, that caffeinated beverage is empty, but I still have my backup caffeinated beverage here, nice and full glass. And we are ready to go. So, congratulations on finishing your second exam. That's a start. Now we're going to start diving in and truing up the economic model that we've been working on so hard on to reality. So let me turn on my pointer, LZ. So up until this point, you have been given partial equilibrium analysis. Partial equilibrium analysis is when you look at one individual market at a time. The labor market, the corn market, coffee beans, computers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is good. And most of the analysis you ever hear on TV, and I'm talking about CNBC, Fox Business, Bloomberg, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS, all the stuff, even PBS. If it's not political pontification and just gobbledygook, if it actually is economic analysis, more often than not, it is this, partial equilibrium analysis, where they analyze one market at a time. The problem is, there's another type of analysis that is very common in economics. It's called general equilibrium analysis. Now, this is a point when every market in the economy is in simultaneous equilibrium. Now, let me be honest with you. It never happens. General equilibrium never really does happen. Well, Professor Yoder, then why are you teaching me something that never happens? I know, that's a good point. Let me walk you through. What professional economists do is we use general equilibrium analysis for policy analysis. So, for example, we take all the policies and everything in the world as it is today and we solve it to equilibrium, even though there are still adjustments taking place. Oh, there's still adjustments from the last tax bill that just went through, or the last stimulus, or COVID, or this or that, right? The economy is currently in a state of adjustment. And we do this. And then we find the general equilibrium and find what the efficiency of the economy is at that point. Then we make a change. Oh, let's change the tax code. Let's change the minimum wage. Let's change this, that. Let's use the Defense Production Act over here. And then we assume the economy reaches another general equilibrium state after that change. And then we compare the two to see, did we get more or less? Was there a deadweight loss or not? What happened? Now, in reality, do we ever reach either of those general equilibrium states? No. Why? Because stuff changes. Stuff changes in the meantime. Stuff changes by all the time, all over the place. But that still doesn't mean general equilibrium isn't a useful tool. Remember, this class is about giving you the analytical tools for you to need to make decisions. Now remember, right now we're focused on efficiency. What people want at least cost. There still is equity, there still is growth, there still is stability. Okay? So just because, remember, we're focused on efficiency here, as most economists are, but that's not the end of the game. So I know this is a busy graph. I'll walk you through it. So we're going to start right here at industry X. What happens in industry X? Well, there's some kind of demand shift, just like you had in your accreditation exercise, just like you had in your exam. What happens? Demand shifts, equilibrium price goes up. That leads to economic profits right here, right? That leads to some economic profits. The profits attract new firms, which leads to a supply curve shift to the right, bringing the price back down to where it was, the exact same price, only new firms. And the production comes back down for each firm to the efficient level, only we have more firms doing it. That's great. But in the meantime, there's industry Y. Now, I want to disabuse you of a notion for a minute. A lot of people think industry X and Y, oh, these two are related. That's like Coke and Pepsi. No, that's not Coke and Pepsi. Let me tell you a story. Did you know the number one threat to profits for toy companies is actually gasoline? Yeah. Coming into the holidays especially, if gasoline prices are high, families generally don't have a choice about gasoline. They've got to get to work, they've got to get their kids to school, they've got to do what they have to do. So what happens if gasoline prices are high? Families tend to cut back on Christmas gift spending. So toy companies love it when gasoline prices are really low. So this could be oil prices and toys. You got me? So if the consumers are demanding more of industry X, they're spending less in industry Y. What happens? That leads the equilibrium price, start here, now it falls, equilibrium price comes down here, that leads to economic losses. What happens when there's economic losses? Firms go out of business. And when firms go out of business, supply curve shifts to the left. Eventually, the equilibrium price comes back up to where it was before. Again, they're producing at the same price, same level, only with fewer firms. But don't worry, these firms that went out of business, what they do, they come up here. So all these toy firms became energy companies, if you follow the example. But I want you to think about that. How a major change in energy could have a profound impact on toys. This is general equilibrium. Okay? This is just two sectors. You get into more complex economies and these models become very, very complicated. But it still is the same idea. A bit of a butterfly effect. What happens in one place affects everything else around it. So whenever we talk about efficiency, there's the gold standard, and it's Pareto. Oh, I totally butchered that. Okay, I got to try to roll the R. Here we go. Pareto, D minus. I still can't do it. I went to one of the colleagues of mine when I did my PhD was Italian. Oh, I could roll that R beautifully. All the Italians were really good at that. I am utterly inept. Total failure for me. All right, let's just be clear. I failed at this, but it's Pareto efficiency or optimality. Now, if you've reached Pareto efficiency or optimality, whatever the allocation of goods and resources and money and everything in your society is, you cannot exchange goods, okay? You cannot buy or sell something, you cannot move something without making someone in the society worse off. There's no change possible to make one person better off without making someone else worse off. Now understand, when I go to Starbucks, I'm going there because Starbucks coffee makes me happy and I'm highly addicted to it. Right? That makes me better off. Why is Starbucks selling me the coffee? Because they're making a profit. They're better off. So that trade would be considered Pareto because both are better off. But if you reach Pareto optimality, then you can't trade anymore because everybody's as awesome as plus. Now, remember we're economists, right? Which means we have to nerd everything up and have really good definitions. First question is, what do we mean by better off? Well, this is very simple for an economist. If you go back and read the appendix to Chapter 6, where we do indifference curves, it means you've reached a farther indifference curve. If you can reach a farther indifference curve, you have higher total utility, and by definition, you are better off. So that's what we mean. But what about changes that make some people better off and others worse off? How does that work? Well, let me tell you a story. We knew when the NAFTA protocol, when the NAFTA accords were coming through the Congress in the 90s, economists knew that there would be losers, right? Some of the jobs in the United States, the businesses would close up shop and would move to another country. We knew that was going to happen. But, and this is key, but this is key. We also knew. So what we wrote into the law was this. Who are the winners in the NAFTA in this case? Well, the first and obvious winner is the company that's going to get higher profits by making their stuff for less money and selling it at roughly the same price. So what we did is we said, right, here's what we're going to do. Companies that are moving their factories, you are going to be required to take your profits, some of your profits, and pay for a college education for every worker you laid off. And the idea was something like this. It's called a side payment. You take from the winners and you do a side payment so that those who are technically worse off from the deal, they lost their jobs, well, maybe they now have a college education, can get a better job, and we take care of them for 4 years. Then they're college educated and they have a better job. That was the plan. It's called a side deal, side payment. In the case of NAFTA, did it work? Nope, totally failed. Actually, not totally failed, but mostly failed. What happened? Well, people lost their jobs, and the companies ponied up the money, kind of, phase one. I've had students who are NAFTA students, and they get through their degree programs, but after they graduate, they're faced with a simple problem. There's no job for what they want where they live. They're going to have to move. And in some of these small towns where the factory disappeared, where they've lived for generations and generations, they didn't want to move. So they get done with their college degree. Okay, great. Then what? The implication was move, you're economically better off, but they didn't want to do that. And in a free society, we're not going to make them. Was it well-intentioned? Yes. Did it have the possibility of working? Yes. But then you ended up with another problem. If you're a company, do you want to move your factory to Mexico where you have to pay for college education for everybody? Or would you rather move it to China where you didn't have to pay for college education for everybody? Well, as long as you can deal with the delays in the shipping, you go somewhere other than Mexico, China, Indonesia, right? Malaysia, Philippines. And here it became the second step of the problem is there were other alternatives to the NAFTA countries that were almost effectively just as popular and would cost less money. And so in the second wave, the jobs didn't go to Mexico or to Canada, they went off to Europe or Asia. But that's how you deal for changes that make some people better off and others worse off. Usually it's a side payment. So here we go. Years ago, Commonwealth of Massachusetts decided that they wanted to save money. So what did they do? They laid off clerks at the DMV. Yippee. And one office saved Massachusetts taxpayers $80,000 a year, having fewer clerks. Was this Pareto? Well, clearly the clerks are worse off, right? They lost their jobs. But we might be able to assume that the great government bureaucracy in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts just gobbled it up and it was okay. All right? Who could be worse off? Well, maybe if you had to wait in line longer at the DMV. I just had to get my driver's license renewed. Even in an appointment world, which is what COVID is now, you have to make an appointment to get in. It was still highly unpleasant. It was the most pleasant I've ever had dealing with the DMV, but it was still unpleasant. So if you have fewer clerks, that means longer wait times. If you have longer wait times, then the costs are borne by the people. So the question is, do the people who have to wait longer at the DMV, assuming the $80,000 a year is translated to lower taxes, is that worth the longer wait times economically? So go back to that idea of time value of leisure, time value of money. If everybody at the DMV had to wait an additional 15 minutes, what's the economic value of that versus a little bit more in taxes? So here, let me tell you a story. Years ago, there were some graduate students, and they were biology graduate students. And biology graduate students, one of the nice things about being a graduate student many times is you get to do fun projects, depending on who your advisor is. And these graduate students like to go hang with polar bears. They were interested in studying polar bears. So that's what they did. They went and studied polar bears. So they went up to the Arctic. They had their tranquilizer guns to put the polar bears to sleep. They shot the polar bear, put it to sleep. They did the tip of the tail to the snout measurement. They took the polar bear paw print. They fitted it with a nice collar to see where the polar bear was going. They checked the teeth, and then they took some polar bear blood samples. Mm-hmm. And they sent this polar bear blood back to labs. They analyzed the polar bear blood, and they found something really interesting in the polar bear blood. In the polar bear blood was this chemical compound called MBTE. Now, MBTE, I do not have a degree in chemistry, and I heretofore consider it unpronounceable unless you speak fluent chemistry. But MBTE was a chemical compound that at the time was only used by one country, the United States, and it was put in gasoline. It doesn't occur in nature, and it was put in gasoline to lower emissions. So this led to one of two conclusions. Either the polar bears had a secret underground racetrack with a bunch of American-fueled cars that they were driving around and maybe even drinking this MBTE, or somehow the MBTE was coming out of our tailpipes in the United States, getting into the air, going up into the Arctic, and somehow entering their food supply. Well, the Congress of the United States basically concluded that that was answer number two. And they decided, and basically the entire sentiment of Congress was not cool, man. What did they do? They banned MBTE. At this point, the people in the Midwest, I want you to think Iowa and Nebraska and Ohio, they put up their hands. They said, call us, we know. Hey, why don't you pay us a little extra to make ethanol out of corn? And nobody gets upset about corn in polar bear blood, so that would be like totally cool. And so that's what they did. They paid a subsidy to corn farmers and subsidy for 45 cents for every gallon of ethanol they blended into fuel. And at the time, there were a bunch of cars that came out that were called the E85 vehicles. And these were special vehicles that could run on 85% ethanol. Yay. Okay. But this E85 ethanol did something interesting. As the farmers quit putting their corn into the food market and started putting it into the fuel market, the price for corn for food rose. Now, for me, I didn't really care. You know, I go to the grocery store, okay, fine. I pay an extra nickel or dime for a ear of corn, zippity-doo-dah, right? But in parts of southern Africa, corn or maize is the primary staple food. Parts of Latin America, they use the corn to make tortillas. That's how they live. And the increased corn prices started causing food riots around the world. Why were there food riots? Why were people in Africa and Latin America unable to afford their meals? Because a couple of graduate students found MBTE in polar bear blood. Now that is general equilibrium. So we're back to our three basic questions that we started the term with. What gets made? How do you make it? And who gets what's made? Now, as long as we are in perfect competition, we're making the right stuff. Why? Because if you're making stuff nobody wants, they don't pay you and you go out of business, right? Resources are efficiently allocated among firms. What does that mean? That means if you're an inefficient firm, an efficient firm is going to kneecap you and send you out of business. So the efficient firms get the resources and the inefficient firms get kneecapped. And at the end, I love this. Final products are distributed efficiently among households. Well, yeah, kind of. The households with the most ability to pay and willingness to pay will get it. Yeah, I know. I know. We're not dealing with fairness arguments right now. We're just dealing with efficiency. Now, generally speaking, as long as we're willing to pay, we get what we want. Free and open markets are key. However, in perfect competition, this equation, price equals marginal cost, is key. Now remember, firms will go to marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but in perfect competition, price equals marginal revenue. Now, price is what the demanders pay. That represents the benefits to society, benefits to people in the community of that product being made and consumed. And marginal cost represents, remember we have opportunity cost in there, the cost to society of making and producing it. So as long as the price equals marginal cost, society's good. Society's good. If the price is greater than marginal cost, make more of what you're making. Society will benefit. Now, society in the aggregate will benefit. Maybe one person gets the benefit, but we're talking about all the benefits of everybody. If price is less than marginal cost, quit making so much. You're making too much. You're spending too much making it, and not enough people are getting the value. Now, this is perfect competition. This argument I've made depends on the industrial structure and the industrial organization called perfect competition. And that had a set of assumptions. All firms and households are price takers in input and output markets. Translation, there's no U.S. government negotiating drug prices. There's no Walmart who can go to a supplier and say, you know what, we think that's too expensive. We want you to cut the price. None of that. There are no labor unions. Clearly, that's not the truth. Firms and households have perfect information. I love that one. That one cracks me up. Really? You know the price of all your groceries at every grocery store in every direction that you could possibly buy? Really? All firms maximize profits. I love this. These assumptions do not always hold in real-world markets. Nah, you think, genius? But like the slide says, and I don't mean to read you the slide, but I want you to grasp this. When we start violating the assumptions, the conclusion that free and regulated markets get us to an efficient outcome breaks down. A lot of professors love to say, free markets, yay, yay, free enterprise, yay, yay, everything is awesome, right? Well, yeah, as long as you're in perfect competition in that sense. But if you start getting rid of those assumptions, this conclusion that everything is awesome and we always get to the efficient point and markets are wonderful and it's all free enterprise and rah, 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 go capitalism, and it starts to break down. Now, that doesn't mean we go jump into alternatives quite yet. But we need to be intellectually honest here. So a market failure occurs when resources are misallocated or allocated inefficiently. You end up with a deadweight loss. Now, I want to be careful with this definition of market failure, guys. I want you to get here. This is not the government gets in and starts screwing around in the market. That's not a market failure in that case. That's a government choice. A market failure is when you leave the market alone and you still end up with a deadweight loss. So you got to be careful with these. Here are the four we're going to talk about. The first is imperfect market structure. So we've done perfect competition. If it's not perfect competition, by definition, it's imperfect. And we're going to do 3 chapters in this. We're going to do monopoly, we're going to do oligopoly, and then we're going to do monopolistic competition. We're going to talk about where the deadweight loss is, what defines that, how the assumption gets broken, which one gets broken, how it works. We'll have some fun along the way. It's not brutally painful. Make sure you studied your cost structures that we did back in the second part of the class. But imperfect market structure, non-competitive, that's one source. The second is the existence of something called public goods. Public goods have a unique feature to them that makes them not profitable to be produced by the market, so the private market tends not to do it. National defense is an example. We'll go through that. We'll go through this one next time we get together. The next one is presence of external costs and benefits. These are called externalities. Pollution's an example of this. But wait a minute, Dr. Yoder, what does that mean? Does that mean maybe? We're going to do a chapter on this. I teach the upper division environmental economics course. And I mean, I literally do an entire course on this idea. And I'm going to boil it down into a nutshell, give you some ideas to think about. But sometimes free markets don't always get there. And then lastly, and this will be the last lecture we do this term, imperfect information. What happens if people don't really know what's going on? What happens if something breaks down? What happens if you really don't know? We'll talk about that. So imperfect competition, one of the assumptions of perfect competition breaks. What is it? Maybe you have firms that are big enough that they don't have to behave like price takers? That's Walmart. What happens if maybe there's only one firm? Maybe it's a pharmaceutical company with a patent. What happens, so there's limited entry of new firms. What happens if we don't have the homogeneous goods assumption? What happens if stuff is actually different in the market and one type isn't the same as every other type? We'll get to that. Public goods are non-excludable, non-rivalrous. Classic example is national defense. We will go through this next time, so I'm not going to delve really deeply into this because we're going to do a good chunk of this on the next lecture. And externalities. Externalities in any transaction, there's a buyer and a seller, right? I go to Starbucks. Starbucks is the seller of the coffee. I am the buyer of the coffee. Now, anybody who's been around me for any length of time knows one simple fact. I am far more pleasant to be around caffeinated than I am not. And right now my son has just walked through the room. He heard me say that, and his head is nodding up and down going, yeah, Father, you really are nicer when you're caffeinated. Yeah, that's truth. He just gave me the thumbs up sign and is walking out of the room. Yes, I am far nicer when I am caffeinated than not. Now my son is not the buyer of the coffee. My son is not the seller of the coffee. But by me being in a better mood, my son is getting the benefits of the coffee. So notice there's a benefit bestowed on somebody who's neither the buyer or the seller. That's an externality. We'll go through these in far more detail next time. And then lastly, imperfect information. What happens if you don't know everything about product characteristics and prices and so on? We'll cover that at the end. So, key idea here. Many times, guys, government intervention is in the name of one of these market failures. Why do we have the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, at the federal government to deal with an externality of pollution? Why do we have why do we have certain government agencies? It's to deal with market failures. Why do we have Department of Defense? To deal with the public good, right? Now, some people argue government involvement can be a cure worse than the disease. You know what? They got a point. It is possible. Is it always true? Not necessarily. But is it possible? Yeah. Now, I want you to understand, though, we have driven this argument in terms of fairness, or excuse me, in terms of efficiency. We have not talked about fairness. Oh, society gets all to the efficient location. Yeah, if you are starving and have to choose between food and medicine, that might not be fair, even if it is efficient. Some contend outcome of any market is unfair. How do you measure fairness? How do you want to do that? That's up to you guys. That's not my job. I'm going to leave fairness questions for you guys to answer. And I am not going to get involved in it. I'll be happy to have one-on-one conversations about it. I'll be happy to point out pitfalls and good points and bad points in the fairness argument. How to metric it, different ways of looking at it. But in the end, that's going to be up to you. So thank you very much. I appreciate you listening to this lecture. Next time we're going to do externalities. Hope you have a good night.